The courtroom was suffocatingly silent, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and unspoken grief. 7-year-old Lily sat on the edge of the oversized leather chair, her legs dangling, feet barely touching the floor. Across from her sat Sarah, the woman who had raised her, tucked her in every night and kissed her scraped knees for 5 years. Sarah's eyes were red, her voice a desperate whisper as she reached out a hand. "Lily, honey, please, just tell them. Tell them you want to come home to Mommy." Lily didn't move. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the woman she had called Mom since she was 2 years old and spoke with a chilling, hollow clarity that echoed through the chamber. "You aren't my mother," she said, "and I know what you did to the woman who was." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sarah's face drained of color, turning a ghostly, translucent white. The judge leaned forward, his spectacles slipping down his nose. In that moment, a decade of carefully constructed lies began to crumble. This wasn't just a child's rebellion, it was the opening of a grave that had been kept sealed for far too long. To the outside world, the Miller household was the definition of suburban grace. Their home in Oak Creek featured a manicured lawn, a swing set in the backyard, and a kitchen that always smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Sarah Miller was the neighborhood's golden girl, a PTA member, a volunteer at the local library, and most importantly, a devoted mother to little Lily. Sarah took pride in the perfect life she had built. Every morning, she would braid Lily's chestnut hair into intricate patterns, securing them with ribbons that matched her floral dresses. She documented every milestone on social media: Lily's first day of kindergarten, Lily's first piano recital, Lily's toothy grin as she blew out candles on a birthday cake. The captions were always the same: "My world, my miracle, my daughter." But if you looked closer than the neighbors ever did, you might notice the way Sarah's grip on Lily's hand was always just a little too tight, or how Sarah's eyes would dart around the room whenever someone mentioned how much Lily looked like her father, Mark, but didn't seem to take after Sarah at all. Mark Miller, a quiet architect who spent more time in his home office than in the living room, was a man of few words. He adored Lily, but there was a shadow behind his eyes, a lingering grief that he tried to drown in blueprints and structural calculations. He had lost his first wife, Elena, in a tragic accident shortly after Lily was born. Sarah had been the angel who stepped in to save them both. She had been Elena's best friend, the one who wiped Mark's tears and stepped into the void left by the tragedy. For years, the narrative was simple. Sarah had rescued a broken family. She had adopted Lily legally, given her a name, and provided the stability Mark couldn't manage on his own. The cracks only began to show on Lily's 7th birthday. It started with a gift, an old, battered music box that had appeared on the doorstep with no return address. When Lily opened it, a haunting melody played, a tune Sarah didn't recognize. "I don't like this music, Lily," Sarah said, her voice uncharacteristically sharp as she reached to take it away. "It sounds sad. Let's go play with your new dollhouse instead." Lily pulled the music box back, hugging it to her chest. Her eyes, usually bright and compliant, were suddenly cold. "It's not sad," Lily whispered. "It sounds like the lady in my dreams, the one who cries." Sarah felt a cold shiver race down her spine. "Dreams are just stories, sweetie. Now give it to me." "No," Lily said firmly. It was the first time she had ever defied Sarah. "And don't call me sweetie. Only my mom is allowed to call me that." Sarah froze, a forced smile plastered on her face. "But Lily, I am your mom." Lily looked directly into Sarah's soul, her small face a mask of sudden, inexplicable wisdom. "No, you're just the lady who lives in our house." From that afternoon on, Lily stopped using the word mom. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. The refusal wasn't a phase. Sarah had spent weeks convincing herself that Lily was simply going through a rebellious streak, a psychological byproduct of turning 7 and seeking independence. She bought child psychology books, consulted forums, and doubled down on the affection. She baked Lily's favorite chocolate chip cookies, bought her the expensive silk ribbons she loved, and organized elaborate playdates. But Lily remained a fortress. Every time Sarah said, "Come to Mommy, sweetheart," Lily would simply look up, her eyes vacant, and respond with a polite, "Yes, Sarah." or "I'm coming, Sarah." The name felt like a slap every time it left the child's lips. It was a cold, clinical recognition of a roommate, not a parent. Mark noticed it too. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long, skeletal shadows across the living room, he found Sarah sitting in the dark, staring at a framed photo of them at the beach. "She called me Sarah again today, Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling, "in front of the mailman. He looked at me like I was a babysitter." Mark sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. He had aged 10 years in the last 3. "She's grieving, Sarah. Maybe she's finally processing that Elena, that her biological mother isn't here. It's natural for kids to pull away from step-parents when they start asking questions about their origins." Sarah snapped her head toward him, her eyes wide and manic. "I am not her step-parent. I adopted her. I changed her diapers while you were locked in your office crying. I am the only mother she has ever known." Mark held up his hands in defense. I know. I'm just saying. She's finding her own identity." But Sarah knew it was deeper than identity. It was the music box. Since that birthday, Lily had hidden it. Sarah had searched the girl's room 3 times while she was at school, tearing through drawers and under the mattress, but the box was nowhere to be found. That night, Sarah was awoken by a faint sound. It wasn't a cry or a scream, but a rhythmic, melodic humming. She crept down the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stopped at Lily's door, which was cracked open just an inch. Lily was sitting on the floor in a patch of moonlight. She wasn't playing with toys. She was holding a small silver locket, one Sarah had never seen before, and humming that same haunting tune from the music box. "Lily," Sarah whispered, pushing the door open. The girl didn't jump. She didn't hide the locket. She turned her head slowly, the moonlight reflecting in her eyes like ice. "She says you're a liar, Sarah." Sarah felt the blood drain from her extremities. Who says that?" "The lady in the locket," Lily said, holding up the piece of jewelry. "She says her name is Elena, and she says she didn't leave me. She says someone made her go away." Sarah lunged forward, snatching the locket from Lily's small hand. "Where did you get this?" "This is trash, Lily. This is an old dirty thing that doesn't belong to you." Lily didn't fight back. She just stood up, her small frame silhouetted against the window. "You can take the locket, Sarah, but you can't take the song. It's inside me now, and she's telling me everything." Sarah retreated from the room, clutching the locket so hard the metal bit into her palm. She locked herself in the bathroom and opened it. Inside was a tiny, faded photo of Elena, Mark's first wife, and a lock of dark hair. But it was the inscription on the back that made Sarah's breath hitch. "To my Lily, I will always find my way back to you. Love, Mom." The handwriting wasn't Elena's. It was a hand Sarah recognized all too well. It was the handwriting of the woman she thought she had silenced forever. Sarah sat on the closed toilet lid, her hands shaking violently. The handwriting on that locket, it wasn't Elena's. It belonged to Martha, Elena's biological mother, the woman Sarah had assured Mark had passed away in a nursing home from dementia years ago. "How did this get in here?" Sarah hissed through gritted teeth. She had controlled every piece of mail, every phone call, and every gift sent to this house for 5 years. She had created a no-fly zone around Lily to ensure no ghost from Elena's past could haunt the perfect life she had painstakingly built. The next morning, Lily didn't come down for breakfast. When Sarah entered the room, the girl was sitting still, staring out the window where the skeletal autumn branches clawed at the glass. "Lily, time for breakfast, sweetie," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fire burning in her chest. "She's out there," Lily said, without turning her head. "Who?" "Grandma." Sarah dropped the silver spoon onto the floor. The clink echoed sharply. "Your grandmother passed away, Lily. I've told you that many times." Lily turned around, her smile devoid of any warmth. "Sarah, you're a really bad liar. She was standing at the bus stop yesterday. She gave me this." She held out a small, crumpled piece of paper. Sarah lunged to snatch it. On it was nothing but an address on the other side of town, near an old warehouse district, accompanied by a timestamp. 4 p.m. today. A surge of fury and fear exploded in Sarah's heart. She realized she could no longer just play the kind mother role. She had to extinguish this spark before it incinerated her sandcastle. "You are staying in this house today," Sarah growled, her usually sweet voice turning raspy and terrifying. "You are grounded. No iPad, no books, nothing. And don't you ever mention that woman again." Sarah locked Lily's door from the outside, an act she had never done before. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number that wasn't in her contacts. "I paid for you to disappear," Sarah said as soon as someone picked up. "Why are you approaching the girl?" On the other end was a weak but venomous voice. "She isn't your child, Sarah. You're a monster. I saw the way you looked at Elena that day on the cliffs. I'm not as senile as you told your husband I am." Sarah felt the ground crack beneath her. "You have no proof. Mark believes me. The whole world believes me. If you come near Lily one more time, I'll make sure you actually disappear." She hung up, her chest heaving. Sarah had no idea that on the other side of the locked door, Lily was pressing her ear to the wood, listening to every single word. The girl didn't cry. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder, a gift Mark had given her to practice her English lessons. Lily pressed stop. She had what she needed. That evening, when Mark came home, he found Sarah cooking a lavish dinner as if nothing were wrong. But when he tried to head upstairs to see Lily, Sarah blocked him at the staircase. "She's tired and went to bed early, honey," she said, her fake smile trembling. "Don't disturb her." Mark looked at his wife, and for the first time he felt something was very wrong. Sarah's gaze wasn't that of a concerned mother. It was the vigilance of a prison guard. Chapter 4. The Cracks in the Glass. The dinner was a staged performance of normalcy. Sarah had prepared Mark's favorite, braised short ribs, and the aroma filled the house, masking the metallic scent of her own fear. Mark sat at the head of the table, picking at his food, his eyes drifting toward the stairs every few minutes. "Sarah," Mark said, his voice low and steady, "why is Lily's door locked? I went up to grab my sweater and the handle wouldn't turn." Sarah's fork scraped harshly against her plate. She didn't look up. "She was having a tantrum, Mark, a bad one. She tried to run out of the house. I did it for her safety. You know how she's been lately, delusional, talking about people who aren't there." Mark leaned back, his brow furrowed. "Delusional? She's 7. She has an imagination, but locking her in, that's not like you." "You haven't been here," Sarah snapped, her voice cracking. "You're at the firm until 8 p.m. every night while I deal with the Sarah comments and the cold stares. I'm doing my best to keep this family together." She began to sob, the practiced, delicate sob that had always worked on him. Mark immediately felt a pang of guilt. He stood up, walked around the table, and pulled her into a hug. Over his shoulder, Sarah's eyes remained open, cold and calculating. She had him back under her thumb, or so she thought. Late that night, while the house was bathed in the blue glow of the moonlight, Lily wasn't sleeping. She had moved her desk chair to the window. She knew the lock on her door was heavy, but the old latch on the window was loose. She had spent the last hour using a metal ruler to shimmy the frame upward. With a soft thud, the window slid open. The crisp night air rushed in, smelling of damp earth and fallen leaves. Lily took her small backpack, pre-packed with the music box, the locket, and her digital recorder, and climbed onto the sturdy oak branch that brushed against the siding of the house. She had practiced this in her head 1,000 times. She climbed down with the agility of a child fueled by a singular, desperate purpose. When her sneakers hit the grass, she didn't look back at the perfect house. She ran toward the bus stop at the end of the lane. She didn't have money, but she had a note her grandmother had slipped her the day before. "If you ever need to leave, show this to the driver. He's an old friend." As the yellow bus pulled up for the late-night shift, the driver looked down at the small girl standing alone in the dark. He saw the note, his expression softening into one of deep pity. "You're Elena's girl," he whispered. "Get on, I'll take you to her." Meanwhile, inside the house, Sarah woke up from a fitful sleep. A strange intuition, a predator's instinct, told her something was wrong. She walked to Lily's room and unlocked the door. The room was empty. The window was wide open. Sarah's heart didn't just race. It felt like it was trying to burst through her ribs. She looked at the desk. There, left in the center of the blotter, was a drawing Lily had made. It showed a woman with long, dark hair holding a baby, and a blonde woman standing behind them with a pair of scissors cutting the air between them. Underneath, in Lily's neat handwriting, were 3 words: "I remember everything." Sarah didn't call Mark. She didn't call the police. She grabbed her car keys and her coat. She knew exactly where Lily was going. She had to get to the old warehouse district before the child spoke to the woman who knew the truth about the day on the cliffs. The hunt had begun. The drive to the warehouse district was a blur of neon lights and cold rain. Sarah's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, her breath coming in ragged gasps that fogged up the windshield. She wiped the glass frantically with her sleeve, her eyes darting to every street corner, every alleyway. "She's just a child," Sarah muttered to herself, a mantra that sounded more like a threat than a comfort. She can't know. She was too young. She was only 2. But Lily wasn't an ordinary 7-year-old. She had Elena's eyes, those deep, perceptive pools that seemed to see through every layer of Sarah's deception. Sarah remembered that day on the cliffs 5 years ago. The wind had been howling, a fierce gale that whipped Elena's hair across her face. Elena had been laughing, holding Lily close to the edge to show her the seagulls, trusting her best friend Sarah to hold her sweater so she wouldn't slip. Sarah remembered the sudden dark impulse, the way the light caught the jagged rocks below, the way Elena's scream had been swallowed by the crashing waves. And she remembered the toddler, Lily, sitting in the grass just a few feet away, staring with wide, silent eyes. Sarah had told everyone Elena slipped. She'd told the police she tried to grab her. She had told Mark she would take care of them both. The GPS chirped, signaling her arrival at the industrial edge of town. The warehouses stood like rotting giants, their windows broken and jagged. Sarah killed the headlights and stepped out into the drizzle. "Lily!" she called out, her voice echoing off the corrugated metal. "Lily, honey, it's Mommy. Come out, it's dangerous here." No answer, only the sound of a distant train whistle and the drip of water from a rusted gutter. Sarah began to walk, her heels clicking rhythmically on the cracked pavement. She followed the address on the scrap of paper she had memorized. Building 42. It was a crumbling brick structure that looked like it hadn't seen life in decades. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of motor oil and dust. Sarah flicked on her phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a blade. She saw a flickering light coming from a small office at the back of the floor. "I know you're in there, Martha," Sarah shouted, her voice hardening. "Give me the girl and I'll let you live out your miserable days in peace. Don't make me do something we'll both regret." She pushed open the heavy wooden door to the office. The room was filled with old filing cabinets and a single desk. Sitting in a chair, her back to the door, was a figure draped in a heavy wool shawl. "Lily is safe," a raspy voice said. It was Martha. "She's with the truth now, Sarah. Something you've been running from for a long time." Sarah stepped closer, her shadow looming large on the wall. "The truth is whatever I say it is. I've been her mother for 5 years. I've earned her. Elena was weak. She didn't deserve a life this perfect." The figure in the chair slowly turned around, but it wasn't Martha. It was a laptop propped up on a stack of books. The screen was glowing, showing a live video feed from a different location. And in the video, Mark was sitting in his office, his face buried in his hands, while Lily stood beside him, holding the digital recorder. The voice hadn't come from the room. It had come from the laptop speakers. "I didn't think you'd admit it so easily." Mark's voice came through the computer, hollow and broken. "I'm listening, Sarah. I've been listening to the whole thing through the baby monitor Lily left active in your car." Sarah froze. She looked down and saw her own purse sitting on the desk. Tucked into the side pocket was a small, glowing device. Lily hadn't just run away. She had set a trap. "Mark, wait!" Sarah lunged for the laptop, but the screen flickered. "Don't come home, Sarah," Mark said, his voice dropping to a whisper of pure disgust. "The police are already on their way to the warehouse. Lily told me where you were going. She knew you'd follow the address she left for you." Sarah realized with a jolt of horror that the address Lily had left on the desk wasn't where the girl was going. It was where she wanted Sarah to be found. The silence of the warehouse was shattered by the distant rhythmic wail of sirens. Sarah scrambled to grab the laptop, her fingers fumbling as she tried to find a way to explain, to lie, to weave one more web of deception. But the screen went black. The connection was severed. She looked at her own reflection in the darkened monitor. Her perfect hair was matted with rain, her expensive coat stained with oil, and her eyes, usually so bright and welcoming, looked like the eyes of a cornered animal. "No, no, no," she whispered, the walls closing in. "Mark, you don't understand. She's just a child. She's confused." She sprinted toward the warehouse exit, her heels catching on the uneven concrete. Outside, the industrial district was no longer a dark hiding place. It was being painted in rhythmic flashes of blue and red. 3 police cruisers drifted into the lot, their headlights blinding her. "Sarah Miller! Hands where we can see them!" A voice boomed through a megaphone. Sarah stopped. For a moment, she considered running into the labyrinth of shipping containers behind the building. But as she looked at the officers stepping out of their cars, she saw a familiar SUV pulling up behind them. Mark stepped out. He looked smaller, his shoulders hunched as if he were carrying the weight of the entire world. And standing beside him, her small hand tucked firmly into his, was Lily. Lily didn't look afraid. She didn't look like a child who had been kidnapped or lost. She looked like a judge delivering a final sentence. "Lily, baby!" Sarah screamed, trying to push past the officers. "They're tricking you. I'm your mommy. Tell them. Tell them how much I love you." An officer caught Sarah by the arm, spinning her around and forcing her against the hood of a patrol car. The cold metal pressed against her cheek. Lily walked forward, stopping just at the edge of the light. She looked at Sarah, not with hate, but with a chilling clinical observation. "You aren't my mommy," Lily said, her voice carrying over the wind. "My mommy had a song. You just had a secret. And secrets don't love people, Sarah. They just hide them." "I saved you!" Sarah shrieked as the handcuffs clicked into place, the sound final and metallic. "I gave you a life. Your mother would have let you fall." Mark stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. "Elena didn't fall, Sarah. You pushed her. We found the locket, and we found the recorder Lily left in your car. You admitted it. You admitted everything to a laptop screen." As the officers began to lead Sarah toward the back of the cruiser, she looked back at the house she had fought so hard to keep. But she wasn't seeing the house. She was seeing the cliff. She was seeing Elena's hand reaching out and the way she had simply stepped back. The door of the police car slammed shut, muffling her screams. Mark picked Lily up, holding her so tightly it was as if he were trying to merge their 2 broken souls into one. "I'm so sorry, Lily," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it." Lily pulled back, her small hands framing his face. "It's okay, Daddy. Grandma Martha said the truth is like a seed. You can bury it as deep as you want, but it will always find the light." As they drove away, leaving the flickering blue lights behind, Lily looked out the window at the moon. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to hum the song to keep the shadows away. The shadows were gone. But as Mark drove toward his mother-in-law's house, the house Sarah said was empty, he didn't notice the look of intense, quiet focus on Lily's face. She was free of Sarah, yes, but the shocks weren't over. Because Lily knew something her father didn't. She knew that Martha hadn't just sent a music box. Martha had sent a warning. The drive to Martha's house was a journey through a world Mark thought was long dead. He had been told for 5 years that Martha was in a high-security memory care facility, unable to recognize her own name. Sarah had even shown him forged medical bills and progress reports. Seeing the GPS lead them to a small, well-kept cottage on the outskirts of the neighboring county felt like entering a parallel dimension. "Is this where she lives, Lily?" Mark asked, his voice thick with a mixture of hope and betrayal. "She's been waiting," Lily replied simply. She was clutching her backpack, her eyes fixed on the glowing yellow windows of the cottage. When the car pulled into the gravel driveway, the front door opened almost immediately. An elderly woman stepped out onto the porch. She was thin, her hair a silver halo in the porch light, but she stood straight as an arrow. This was not a woman lost to dementia. This was a woman who had been sidelined by a master manipulator. Mark killed the engine and stepped out, his legs feeling like lead. "Martha?" The woman looked at him, her expression a complex tapestry of grief and relief. "Hello, Mark. It's been a long time since Sarah told me you moved to Europe to forget my daughter." Mark stopped in his tracks. "Europe? I never left Oak Creek. She told me. She told me you didn't want to see us." that seeing Lily reminded you too much of the accident. Martha let out a hollow, dry laugh. She played us both, Mark. She told me you blamed me for Elena's clumsiness on that cliff. She told me if I ever contacted you, you'd file a restraining order and I'd never see Lily again. Lily ran across the grass and threw herself into Martha's arms. The old woman held the child with a ferocity that brought tears to Mark's eyes. This was the missing piece, the grandmotherly love that Sarah had tried to simulate but could never truly replicate. They moved inside, where the air smelled of lavender and old books. It was a far cry from the clinical, sterile perfection of Sarah's house. Here there were photos of Elena everywhere. Elena as a child, Elena at her wedding, Elena holding a newborn Lily. I had to wait, Martha whispered, smoothing Lily's hair as they sat around a small wooden table. I knew Sarah was watching. I had to wait until Lily was old enough to understand, old enough to help me. I started sending the gifts through the old bus driver, a man who knew Elena since she was a girl. Mark put his head in his hands. I lived with a monster for 5 years. I let her raise my daughter. She didn't raise me, Lily said, her voice small but firm. I just stayed there. I was waiting for the lady in the song to tell me it was time. But as the night wore on, and Mark began to discuss the legalities of the arrest and Sarah's impending trial, Martha's face grew pale. She looked at Lily, then back at Mark, her eyes darting toward the hallway. Mark, Martha said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. There's something you need to see, something I found in the documents Elena left with me just a week before she died. She stood up and walked to an old roll-top desk, pulling out a thick, yellowed envelope. Elena wasn't just best friends with Sarah. She was suspicious of her. She was starting to realize that Sarah had been stalking your family long before you and Elena even met. Mark opened the envelope. Inside were printouts of old social media posts, blurred photos taken from a distance, and a diary entry in Elena's handwriting. The first page read, "She knows things about Mark she shouldn't know. She talks about our future as if she's already part of it. I'm afraid, Martha. I think Sarah didn't just want to be my friend. I think she wanted to be me." But it was the last document in the pile that made Mark's heart stop. It was a birth certificate. Not Lily's, but one for a child born a year earlier, in a different state. "Who is this?" Mark asked, pointing to the name on the paper. Martha looked at the door to ensure Lily was out of earshot. "That is Sarah's biological child, Mark. A child she abandoned in a hospital fire 7 years ago. A child the world thinks is dead." Mark stared at the birth certificate, the paper fluttering in his trembling hand. The name on the document was Rose. According to the records, she would be 8 years old now, just a year older than Lily. "A hospital fire?" Mark whispered, his voice cracking. "Sarah told me she was never able to have children. She said it was her greatest heartbreak. She told me that's why she loved Lily so much, because she was the miracle she never thought she'd have." Martha nodded grimly, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "That was the lie she used to reel you in, Mark. She played on your sympathy. But Elena found out. She started digging into Sarah's past after she noticed Sarah becoming obsessed with Lily's nursery. Sarah didn't just lose a child. She was under investigation for negligence. The fire started in her apartment, and while Sarah escaped with her jewelry and a suitcase, the baby was left behind, Mark finished, a wave of nausea rolling over him. "The authorities assumed the child perished," Martha continued, her voice dropping even lower. "The building was a total loss, but Elena's notes say something different. She found a witness, a neighbor who claimed they saw a woman carrying a bundle out the back exit minutes before the fire department arrived. Sarah disappeared for 3 months after that, resurfacing in our town with a clean slate and a tragic story." Mark looked toward the hallway where Lily was supposedly sleeping. If that child is alive, where is she? And why would Sarah kill Elena just to take Lily? "Because Lily was the perfect replacement," Martha said. "Lily had your status, your wealth, and the life Sarah felt she deserved. Sarah didn't want a child she had to hide. She wanted a child she could show off. But she couldn't have both. She needed a blank slate." Suddenly, a soft creak came from the hallway. Both Mark and Martha froze. Lily was standing in the shadows, her eyes wide. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the birth certificate on the table. "The girl in the garden," Lily whispered. Mark stood up quickly, moving to her side. "Lily, honey, you should be asleep. What are you talking about?" "In the old house," Lily said, her voice sounding far away. "Sometimes, when you were at work and Sarah was busy in the kitchen, I would see a girl in the woods behind our fence. She had messy hair and old clothes. She never spoke. She just watched me play." A cold dread settled in Mark's chest. Their house backed up to a dense patch of forest and a small abandoned gardener's shack that had been boarded up for years. "I thought she was a ghost," Lily continued. "Sarah told me she was a forest spirit, and that if I ever tried to talk to her, the spirit would take my voice away. So I stayed away. But she looked like me, Daddy, just sadder." Mark grabbed his coat, his face hardening into a mask of pure determination. "Martha, call the police. Tell them to send a unit to the gardener's shack at the back of my property, now." "Mark, wait, it's dangerous," Martha cried out. "I've spent 5 years living with a murderer," Mark shouted as he headed for the door. "I'm not letting her victims suffer for one more second." He drove back to the house that was now a crime scene. The yellow police tape fluttered in the wind like mocking banners. He didn't go through the front door. He grabbed a heavy flashlight from the trunk and ran toward the woods, the mud splashing against his jeans. The shack was a derelict structure, overgrown with ivy and rotting wood. The door was secured with a heavy, rusted padlock, but the lock looked brand new. Mark didn't look for a key. He picked up a large rock and smashed the lock until the wood splintered. He kicked the door open. The smell was the first thing that hit him. The smell of stale bread, damp earth, and unwashed skin. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, landing on a small cot in the corner. There, huddled under a thin, tattered blanket, was a girl. She looked exactly like the photo on the birth certificate, but her skin was pale and translucent from a lack of sunlight. Around her neck, tied with a piece of common twine, was a matching locket to the one Lily had. The ghost wasn't a spirit. It was the secret Sarah had kept literally in her own backyard. Gemini Danoi, Chapter 9, The Girl in the Shadows. Mark's breath hitched in his throat. The girl on the cot didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. She simply squinted against the harsh glare of his flashlight. Her eyes, the same shape as Sarah's, but filled with a profound, quiet exhaustion staring back at him. "Are you the man from the big house?" she whispered. Her voice was thin, like paper tearing. Mark dropped to his knees, lowering the flashlight so he wouldn't blind her. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Mark, you. You're Rose, aren't you?" The girl nodded slowly. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling. "The lady, the one who brings the bread. She said I had to stay here because the world is on fire. She said if I went outside, I would burn." The sheer scale of Sarah's cruelty hit Mark like a physical blow. She hadn't just stolen a life. She had manufactured a living nightmare for her own flesh and blood. Sarah had kept Rose in this shack, feeding her lies and scraps, while she played the perfect mother to Lily in the mansion just a few hundred yards away. It was a sick backup plan, a hidden penance, or perhaps just the ultimate act of control. "The fire is gone, Rose," Mark said, his voice shaking. "I promise you, the world is safe." He reached out, and for the first time in her memory, Rose felt the touch of someone who didn't want to hide her. She collapsed into his arms, her small frame surprisingly light, as if she were made of nothing but bird bones and hope. As Mark carried her out of the shack, the sirens began to wail again. The police, summoned by Martha, were swarming the backyard. Officers with flashlights converged on the woods, their beams dancing through the trees like restless spirits. "Over here!" Mark shouted. A female officer ran toward them, gasping when she saw the child in Mark's arms. Is this the missing child?" "This is Rose," Mark said, his eyes burning, "and she's going to tell you everything Sarah Miller did." While the paramedics wrapped Rose in a thick, warm blanket, Mark stood back, watching the house. He saw the lights in the kitchen, the place where Sarah had baked cookies and laughed while a little girl starved in the woods. He realized then that Sarah's love was a predatory thing. She didn't love Lily, she loved the image of Lily. And she didn't hate Rose, she was simply ashamed of the failure Rose represented. Back at Martha's cottage, the atmosphere had shifted from mystery to a heavy, somber reality. When Mark arrived with the police and the news of Rose, Lily stood by the window watching the ambulance pull into the driveway. "Is she okay?" Lily asked as Mark walked through the door. Mark knelt down and hugged Lily. "She's going to be okay, Lily, because of you. If you hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't refused to call her mom, we never would have looked for the truth." "She's my sister, isn't she?" Lily asked, her eyes searching his. Mark hesitated. Biologically, no. But in the wreckage of Sarah's lies, they were the only two people who truly understood the darkness they had survived. "In every way that matters, Lily. Yes." But as the night turned to dawn, a new realization began to dawn on Mark. The police had Sarah in custody, but the legal battle was only beginning. Sarah was a master of manipulation, and she still held one final card. The phone rang on Martha's kitchen counter. It was the lead detective. "Mark," the detective said, his voice grim, "we have a problem. Sarah is refusing to talk to us. She says she has information about Elena's death, information that involves someone else. She's demanding to see you, alone." The interrogation room was cold, smelling of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Sarah sat behind the reinforced glass, her orange jumpsuit a jarring contrast to the elegant floral dresses Mark was used to seeing her in. She didn't look like a broken woman. She looked like a queen in exile, her chin tilted upward, her eyes sharp and predatory. Mark sat down, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. He didn't speak. He simply stared at her, waiting for the lies to start. "You look tired, Mark," Sarah said, her voice smooth, as if they were discussing the weather over breakfast. "You shouldn't let the stress get to you. It's bad for your heart." "Where did you keep her, Sarah?" Mark's voice was a low growl. "For 7 years. How could you look at Lily every day and know your own daughter was rotting in a shed?" Sarah's expression didn't flicker. "Rose was a complication. She reminded me of a version of myself I wanted to forget. But I kept her alive, didn't I? I fed her. I protected her from a world that would have judged her for being the fire baby. I'm a savior, Mark. I saved her, and I saved you." "You killed Elena," Mark said, leaning forward until his face was inches from the glass. Sarah smiled, a slow, terrifying curve of the lips. "Did I? Or did I just let gravity do what it was already planning to do? But that's not why I called you here. You think you've won. You think you'll take Lily and Rose and live happily ever after with that old hag Martha." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphones barely caught. "If I go down for murder, Mark, I'm taking everyone with me. Did you ever wonder why the police never found Elena's phone? Or why the accident happened on the one day the park cameras were being serviced?" Mark felt a cold pit form in his stomach. "What are you talking about? I wasn't alone on that cliff, Mark. Well, I was the only one who pushed, but I wasn't the only one who wanted her gone. Ask your loyal partner at the firm, David. Ask him about the gambling debts Elena found out about. Ask him who told me exactly where you two would be hiking that day." Mark's heart hammered against his ribs. David was his best friend since college. He was the one who had handled the life insurance claim. He was the one who had urged Mark to move on with Sarah. "You're lying," Mark hissed. "You're trying to tear my life apart because yours is over." "Maybe," Sarah said, leaning back and crossing her arms. "But if I testify that David helped me plan it, that he provided the floor plans to your house so I could spy on you before we even met, how do you think that will look? I can make this a very long, very dirty trial. Or you can make sure the murder charge is downgraded to reckless endangerment. You can tell the judge I'm mentally unstable. Get me a comfortable facility, not a cage." She was bargaining with the blood of his wife. Mark felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. He wanted to shatter the glass and wrap his hands around her throat. But then he remembered Lily's face. He remembered the digital recorder. "You're right about one thing, Sarah," Mark said, his voice suddenly calm. "You are mentally unstable. But you're wrong about David." He pulled a small folder from his jacket. "The police already talked to David. He confessed to the gambling debts an hour ago, but he also gave them something else. He kept every single text message you sent him, Sarah. Every threat, every bribe. He was terrified of you. He didn't help you because he wanted Elena dead. He helped you because you told him you'd kill his kids if he didn't." Sarah's composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened, the pupils shrinking to pinpricks. "The shock you were planning for me?" Mark continued. "It's already over. You're not going to a comfortable facility. You're going to a place where you'll never see the sun again. Just like you did to Rose." As Mark stood up to leave, Sarah lunged at the glass, screaming, her fingernails clawing at the surface. "She's mine! Lily is mine! I made her!" Mark didn't look back. He walked out of the precinct and into the morning air. But as he reached his car, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Martha. "Mark, come to the house immediately. Lily found something in the lining of Rose's old blanket. We were wrong. There's a third locket." Chapter 11. The Secret of the Third Locket. The drive back to Martha's house was a blur of high-speed turns and a mounting sense of dread. Every time Mark thought he had reached the bottom of Sarah's depravity, a new floor opened up beneath him. He pulled into the driveway, the gravel spraying beneath his tires, and sprinted into the cottage. Martha was sitting on the sofa, her face ashen. Lily and Rose were sitting together on the rug, an image of two sisters united by trauma. Between them lay a tattered gray wool blanket, its lining ripped open. And there, glinting in the light of the floor lamp, was a third silver locket. It was identical to the one Lily had and the one Rose had worn. "Mark, look," Martha whispered, handing him the piece of jewelry. Mark's fingers felt numb as he pried the locket open. Inside was a photograph, but it wasn't of Elena or Sarah. It was a photo of two identical baby girls wrapped in a single blue blanket. On the back, written in a delicate, shaky hand that Mark didn't recognize, were the words, "The twins. Separate them to save them. Sarah is coming." Mark looked from the locket to Lily and then to Rose. "Twins?" he whispered. "But that's impossible. Lily is Elena's. Rose is Sarah's." "No, Mark," Martha said, her voice trembling with a realization that changed everything. "Think about it. Sarah appeared in our lives right after the hospital fire. She claimed she lost her baby, but what if the baby she lost wasn't hers? What if she stole one of Elena's children the night they were born?" Mark felt the room spin. "Elena only had one baby. I was there, Martha. I saw Lily in the hospital." "Did you?" Martha challenged gently. "You were sedated after the car accident on the way to the hospital, remember? You didn't wake up until hours after the birth. The doctors told you there were complications. They told you Elena had a difficult delivery." The memory hit Mark like a tidal wave, the smell of antiseptic, the haze of painkillers, and Sarah. Sarah standing over his hospital bed, holding a bundle and telling him, "Elena is resting, Mark. But look at your beautiful daughter." "Sarah didn't just find us after the accident," Martha said, her eyes filling with tears. "She was there the whole time. She was the night nurse's assistant. I found her name on the old staff logs Elena had hidden in her files. Sarah swapped the records. She took one twin and raised her as her own miracle, Rose. She left the other with you, Lily, so she could eventually marry into the family and have them both." Rose, who had been listening in silence, suddenly spoke up. "She used to tell me I was the bad one," she whispered. "She said Lily was the good princess who got to live in the castle, and I was the shadow who had to stay in the dark to keep the princess safe." Lily reached out and took Rose's hand. For the first time, the resemblance between the two girls was undeniable. It wasn't just the eyes or the hair, it was the soul behind the gaze. "She didn't want a daughter," Lily said, her voice cold with a maturity no 7-year-old should possess. "She wanted a collection. She wanted to own us both." The shock of the revelation was interrupted by a frantic knocking at the door. Mark instinctively stood in front of the girls, his hand reaching for a heavy fire poker by the hearth. It was the detective from the precinct. He looked pale, his tie loosened, his forehead beaded with sweat. "Mark," the detective panted, "you need to get the girls out of here, now." "What happened?" Mark demanded. "The transport van," the detective said, his voice dropping. "On the way to the county jail, a black SUV rammed them off the road. 2 officers are down. Sarah is gone." "She didn't act alone, Mark. She had people on the outside, people we didn't know about." Mark looked at the 2 girls, his daughters, both of them. The nightmare hadn't ended with an arrest. It was evolving. Sarah was free, and she was coming for the collection she believed belonged to her. Chapter 12. The Storm Breaks. The air in the cottage turned ice cold. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed his car keys and a heavy flashlight, while Martha gathered the girls' jackets. "We go to the cabin," Mark commanded, referring to a secluded property 3 hours north that was still in Elena's family name, a place Sarah had never visited. "Mark, she'll be looking for your car," Martha warned, her voice trembling as she zipped up Rose's oversized coat. "We aren't taking my car." Mark looked at the detective. "Give me your keys. Take my SUV and drive toward the city. Lead them away." The detective nodded grimly, handing over the keys to his unmarked sedan. "Be careful, Mark. She's desperate. A woman like that with nothing to lose is a predator with no off switch." As they hurried to the car, the sky opened up. A torrential downpour turned the driveway into a river of mud. Mark buckled Lily and Rose into the back seat. They sat shoulder to shoulder, two halves of a whole finally reunited, their faces pale in the flickering lightning. The drive was a descent into a watery hell. Mark kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the phantom headlights of a black SUV emerging from the mist. Beside him, Martha was silent, her lips moving in a wordless prayer. In the back, Lily was whispering to Rose. She was telling her about the world outside the shed, about ice cream, the ocean, and the way the sun felt on your face in the middle of summer. Rose listened with wide, hungry eyes, clutching the third locket as if it were a life preserver. "Daddy?" Lily's voice broke through the sound of the windshield wipers. "Yes, honey?" "She won't find us, right? Because she doesn't have the song." Mark tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "She'll never touch either of you again, Lily, I promise." But as they reached the winding mountain road that led to the cabin, a bright flash of light filled the cabin of the car. It wasn't lightning. It was the high beams of a vehicle that had been waiting in the shadows of a turnout. The black SUV lunged forward, slamming into the rear bumper of the sedan. The impact sent them skidding toward the edge of the ravine. Martha screamed. Mark fought the steering wheel, his muscles straining as he corrected the slide just inches from the precipice. "Hold on!" Mark roared. He floored the accelerator, but the sedan was no match for the heavy engine of the SUV. The pursuer rammed them again, this time spinning the sedan 180 degrees. The car came to a bone-jarring halt against a thick pine tree. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the hiss of steam from the radiator. Mark wiped blood from his forehead, his vision swimming. He looked back. Lily, Rose, Martha. "We're okay," Martha gasped, though she was clutching her arm in pain. The girls were huddled together, terrified but alive. Outside, the door of the black SUV opened. A figure stepped out into the rain, draped in a dark raincoat, holding a heavy crowbar. It wasn't an accomplice. It was Sarah. Her face was a mask of madness, her hair plastered to her skull, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying, singular purpose. She didn't go for Mark. She didn't go for Martha. She walked straight toward the back door where the girls were trapped. "Mama's here, my little miracles," Sarah sang out, her voice a distorted, haunting version of the lullaby Lily had once loved. "The game is over. It's time to come home." She swung the crowbar, shattering the rear passenger window. Glass sprayed into the cabin. Rose shrieked, burying her face in Lily's shoulder. "Get away from them!" Mark scrambled to open his door, but the frame was pinned against the tree. He kicked the door with all his might, the metal groaning but refusing to budge. Sarah reached a gloved hand through the broken window, her fingers clawing for Lily's hair. "You were the favorite, Lily. You were the one who got the ribbons. Don't be ungrateful." But then something happened that Sarah hadn't expected. Rose, the shadow child, the one who had been told she was nothing, grabbed the jagged piece of glass from the seat and lunged forward. She didn't scream. She bit down on Sarah's hand with the ferocity of a trapped animal. Sarah howled in pain, pulling her hand back. In that moment of distraction, Mark finally kicked his door open. He lunged out into the mud, tackling Sarah to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, a blur of rain and rage. Sarah was surprisingly strong, fueled by a psychotic conviction that she was the victim. "They're mine!" she screamed, clawing at Mark's eyes. "I earned them! I bled for them!" "You stole them!" Mark shouted, pinning her wrists. "You killed for them, but you'll never own them!" As they struggled, the sound of more sirens echoed up the mountain. The detective's backup had arrived, but Sarah saw the lights and knew the end was near. With a guttural cry, she twisted free, scrambling toward the edge of the ravine. "If I can't have them," she shrieked, looking back at the car where the two girls watched through the shattered glass, "then no one will." The The ravine was a jagged maw of darkness, the bottom invisible beneath the swirling mist and the torrential rain. Sarah stood on the very edge, the mud crumbling beneath her boots. She looked like a ghost of the woman she once was, hollow, frantic, and utterly consumed by the fire of her own making. "Sarah, stop!" Mark yelled, his hands outstretched as he stepped cautiously toward her. "It's over. Look at the girls. Look at what you're doing." Sarah didn't look at Mark. She looked past him, her eyes locking onto the two small faces peering through the shattered window of the car. Her expression shifted from rage to a terrifying, twisted kind of tenderness. "Lily." "Rose," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "Don't you see? This world is too cruel for you. They'll try to separate you again. They'll tell you I was the monster, but I was the only one who kept you both in the same place. I was the one who kept the family together. You kept one in a cage and the other in a lie," Mark shouted, his voice cracking. "That's not a family, Sarah. That's a collection of trophies." Sarah's laugh was a sharp, brittle sound. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver lighter. "If I go, everything goes. The house, the secrets, the memory of Elena. I have the documents, Mark, the real ones, the ones that prove who they are. If I drop this, the truth stays buried with me." She held the lighter over a small, leather-bound satchel she had hidden under her coat. The original birth records and the hospital logs she had stolen years ago. In the back seat of the car, Lily gripped Rose's hand. She saw the desperation in the woman who had raised her. She saw the madness, and for the first time, Lily felt a wave of something that wasn't fear. It was pity. Lily pushed open the car door. "Lily, no, stay back," Mark cried out. But Lily stepped into the mud, her small floral dress soaked through, her chestnut hair clinging to her face. She walked towards Sarah with a calm that stunned everyone. "Sarah," Lily said softly. Sarah froze, the lighter flickering in the wind. "Yes, baby. Are you coming to Mommy?" "You said you loved me," Lily said, stopping just a few feet away from her father. "But you didn't. You loved the girl you wanted me to be. You loved the girl who called you Mom because she didn't know any better." Lily reached into her own pocket and pulled out the locket she had carried since her birthday. She held it up, the silver reflecting the flashes of lightning. "My mother died on a cliff because of you," Lily continued, her voice steady. "But she didn't leave me. She's in the song. She's in Rose's eyes, and she's in me. You can burn the papers, Sarah. You can jump into the dark, but you can't take the truth away. We know who we are now." Sarah's hand trembled. The flame of the lighter died out in the rain. The power she thought she held, the leverage of the secret, had evaporated. Her daughters weren't hers to own. They were people, and they had found each other. The police lights finally crested the hill, illuminating the scene in a harsh strobe-like rhythm. Officers spilled out of their cars, weapons drawn. "Drop the bag, Sarah. Hands in the air." Sarah looked at the police, then back at Lily. A look of profound realization crossed her face, the realization that she was finally, truly alone. The perfect picture had been shredded. "I gave you everything," Sarah whispered, a single tear tracking through the dirt on her cheek. She didn't jump. She didn't fight. The strength seemed to leak out of her all at once. She dropped the satchel into the mud and fell to her knees, her head bowed as the officers moved in to restrain her. As they clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists for the final time, Mark rushed forward and scooped Lily into his arms, pulling Rose out of the car and huddling them both together. They stood there, a small island of wreckage in the storm, as the woman who had tried to destroy them was led away into the dark. The documents in the mud were soaked, but the ink was still legible. The truth had survived the rain dot 6 months later. The Oak Creek house was gone. Mark had sold it, unable to walk through hallways that echoed with the ghosts of Sarah's fabrications. Instead, they moved to a house by the sea, not far from Martha's cottage. It was a place of salt air, open windows and wide open spaces where no one ever had to hide in the shadows. On a warm Saturday morning, the backyard was filled with the sound of laughter. Rose, her skin now healthy and glowing, was chasing a golden retriever through the tall grass. She was wearing a bright yellow dress, her favorite color because it reminded her of the sun she had been denied for so long. Lily sat on the porch steps, sketching in a notebook. She looked up as Mark walked out carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. He sat down beside her, looking out at his two daughters. The legal battle had been grueling, a whirlwind of DNA tests, depositions, and the media circus surrounding Sarah's trial, but the verdict had been final. Sarah Miller would spend the rest of her life in a maximum security psychiatric prison. "What are you drawing, Lily?" Mark asked, leaning over. Lily turned the page. It was a portrait of 3 women standing in a circle, their hands joined. One was Martha, one was a woman with long dark hair and a kind smile, Elena, and the third was a woman they hadn't met yet, but Lily said she felt her presence. It was the nurse who had tried to protect them in the hospital all those years ago. "I'm drawing the people who didn't let us stay lost," Lily said. Rose ran up the steps, out of breath and grinning. She reached into her collar and pulled out her locket. "Daddy, look, Martha polished it. It shines like a mirror now." Mark pulled both girls into a hug. The shocks were over. The secrets had been bled dry. But the greatest revelation wasn't the betrayal or the twins or the crimes. It was the resilience of a child's heart. "I have something for you," Mark said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out 2 small matching keys. "These are for the new music boxes I got for your rooms. They don't play the old song anymore. They're blank. You get to record your own songs now, together." Rose's eyes widened. "Any song we want?" "Any song you want," Mark promised. As the sun began to set, casting a golden path over the ocean, the 2 sisters stood at the railing of the porch. They didn't need to speak. They simply stood in the light, their shoulders touching. Lily began to hum, a new melody, one that was bright, soaring, and free. After a moment, Rose joined in. Their voices blended perfectly, 2 identical frequencies finally finding their harmony. The woman in the prison cell miles away would never hear it. The world that had been built on lies had crumbled, and in its place, a foundation of truth had been laid. Lily had refused to call a stranger mom, and in that one act of defiance, she had saved a sister, a father, and herself. The song of the sun had finally replaced the whispers of the dark.